CNN app.
You have to do something with Mexico. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security.
Are you considering U.S. action in Cuba?
I think it's just going to fall. I don't think we need any action. Colombia is very sick, too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States, and he's not going to be doing it very long, let me tell you.
President Trump issuing repeated threats last night against Cuba, Mexico, Colombia, repeatedly claiming the U.S. could take over Greenland, the self-governing territory of a key NATO ally. This all coming less than 48 hours after the stunning U.S. military operation that captured Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and his wife. CNN chief international correspondent Clarissa Ward is in neighboring Colombia, the capital, Bogota. Clarissa, how are these leaders responding? And how do you interpret and think about President Trump's words and frame, considering what we saw over the weekend?
Well, Casey, it was certainly quite the barrage in the space of one evening, a series of threats and warnings to Colombia, Mexico, Cuba, Iran, Greenland, as you mentioned. The president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, really not mincing his words today in a lengthy and quite fiery post on X, essentially warning President Trump off of even contemplating the idea of some kind of U.S. military intervention here in Colombia. He talked about the fact that despite his renouncing of weapons as part of his past, he was a former guerrilla, that he would be willing to pick up arms again to defend his homeland. And he warned President Trump that if there was some kind of U.S. military intervention, that you would see a large and fiery response on the streets throughout Colombia from ordinary people, writing, "If you arrest a president who a good part of my people want and respect, you will unleash a popular jaguar." So a very strong and frankly terse warning to President Trump. But I would say, Casey, we've been also talking to people in the presidential office, and CNN has also spoken to the defense minister, Pedro Sanchez, who are really trying to tamp down the rhetoric here, who are saying that the cooperation in terms of law enforcement continues between the U.S. and Colombia. Colombia continues to be the U.S.'s most important strategic ally in terms of its counter-narcotics strategy for the past 4 decades, and that cooperation is continuing. We heard a sort of similar tone from Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who pretty much seemed to brush off President Trump's warning that Mexico should, quote, get its act together, saying, listen, that's just the way he talks. But nonetheless, there is clearly very real concern throughout this region, because what we saw take place over the course of the last few days was very shocking to many, and U.S. meddling and military intervention is anathema to so many countries in this region because of the history of the last few decades. So we also heard there was another post that I thought was interesting from President Petro, where he said, don't just think Latin America is a nest of criminals poisoning your people. Respect us and read your history. Again, really issuing that warning to President Trump. Of course, what do we see today? A rather bombastic post from the U.S. State Department saying, quote, this is our, in capital letters, hemisphere. That is unlikely to calm anyone's anxieties in Latin America, Casey.
Yeah, some people referring to that as the Don Roe doctrine. Clarissa Ward in Bogota, Colombia. Clarissa, thank you very much for that report. Really appreciate it. And with us now is the retired Admiral James Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, and he is now CNN Senior Military Analyst. Admiral, I'm so grateful to have you here today in the aftermath of all of this. And, you know, I'd really honestly like to start by getting your thoughts on what has been accomplished here, and then what you view as the biggest risk going forward.
You started by saying I'm a former Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, which is, of course, correct. But Casey, for this conversation, I was born in South Florida. I speak Spanish. I've traveled the region extensively, and I was commander of U.S. Southern Command. I've been to Colombia too many times to count, so I really know the region quite well. I look at what happened last night as a tactical success. My hat is off to Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Raising Cane, and his entire team. Superb tactical execution. Now the hard part starts. I think that Marco Rubio is the right person to be running point on this. Like me, he's a South Floridian, Spanish-speaking, native Spanish speaker, knows the region deeply, has been seized with this for a couple of decades. He's the right person. He's got three options. One, he can run the Iraq playbook, bring in a couple of 100,000 U.S. troops. Not going to happen. No one wants to do that. Option two, he can work with the remainders from the Maduro group. Seems to be publicly, at least, that's where this is trending. Work with the former vice president, now acting president, Delcy Rodriguez. Option three, he could put his shoulder, the U.S. shoulder, behind the opposition. Edmundo Gonzalez, the rightfully elected leader, Maria Mercado, leader of the opposition party. I think he's going to go for option two in the short term because you kind of have to go where the levers of power are. But I hope over time he'll lean toward that democratically elected opposition. Final thought, as would say in the Navy, he's going to have to sail a pretty narrow sea. This is a tough one between options 2 and 3. Going to be complicated. To the degree anyone can do it, he's the right person.
Admiral, do you, considering your deep knowledge of the region, both as you experienced it and also, knowing the history of American military adventures in Latin America, do they tend to work out well for the United States?
It's a mixed bag for sure. I can think of going back 100 years ago, we had some successful, quick interventions in places like Nicaragua and Cuba, pre-Castro. Certainly Panama, I think, goes down as a success. Grenada, I think, was successful. On the other hand, we've had a lot of failures in the region as well. When I look at my time just over a decade ago as commander of Southern Command, I look at Colombia. That was a success. We defeated a communist regime that was trying to take over the legitimate government. Now Colombia is a free democracy. It hurts my heart to see the U.S. and Colombia drifting apart. I hope we don't go further in that regard because the Colombians have a very capable military, the best in Latin America, and they will fight. Let's hope we don't get to that point.
Yeah, what would you say to the president? We played kind of what he has had to say about, the warning he had for Mexico, obviously what he said about the Colombian president, and there's the matter of Greenland. If you're advising him about how far to take this, he clearly wants the world to think he will take it as far as he did with this Maduro seizure. What do you think is the right course for him?
First and foremost, focus on making Venezuela a success. Put your best people on the problem. Do everything you can to make that come out successfully. Number two, each of these countries are different. In the United States, we tend to sort of think, hey, everybody south of us, they're all kind of the same. They just speak Spanish down there. None of that is true. Each country is different and unique. Have to respect that. So with Colombia, my advice would be wait for the next election. You may very likely have someone much more to your liking coming in. In the case of Mexico, huge country, huge economy. We've got to work with them. Don't go confrontational, but push them to go after the drug problem, provide them resources to do so. On Greenland, completely different than any of the other circumstances, Casey, but on Greenland, we should be working with the Danes, with the Greenlanders, and create a real special relationship for Greenland with the United States. We have that, for example, in the Marshall Islands in the Pacific. So my fundamental advice is recognize each country's different, have a different approach in each of them, but job one is Venezuela.
All right. Admiral James Stavridis, thank you very much for bringing your expertise to us today, sir. Always appreciate having you.
Thanks, Case.
All right. Coming up next here.